Good evening, Long Hill. Chief Alex Rosso and I would like to welcome you to our 100th anniversary virtual kickoff event. We are so excited to kick off our celebration of service. I'd like to thank our chairman, past Chief Douglas Bogan, and the members of the 100th Anniversary Committee for all of their efforts over the past year. As you are all well aware, this last year has been one of the most difficult, and we've lost many of our friends and family members to this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Through all of this, though, there's one thing that never wavered, and that is the dedication of our volunteers. For the past century, our volunteers have been the heart and soul of this great organization, and we would like to thank each and every one of you for your service to the District of Long Hill and the town of Trumbull. Let us not forget those who are no longer with us that shape the future of our organization.
Tonight, we will take a trip down memory lane beginning back to 1921. We will read the minutes from the meeting held in February and March of 1921 when the members of the fire company agreed to pay the fees to become incorporated and sign the documents which created the Long Hill Volunteer Fire Company No. 1 Incorporated. The remainder of the program will be delivered by a group of special guests who are with us this evening, our past presidents and our past chiefs. They will review the history of the fire company from 1921 to 1971.
Please drop your comments in the chat box as we move through the program. If we have time at the end, we may try and respond to some of your comments. Please sit back and enjoy this special historical journey that begins right now. The meeting minutes of the Long Hill Volunteer Fire Company. Meeting held February 1st, 1921 at Levitt's Place. Meeting called to order at 8:30 p.m. Mr. Coombs in the chair. Motion made and seconded to suspend the roll call was carried. Motion made and seconded that the minutes of the January 4th meeting be accepted and carried. Motion made and seconded that minutes of the January 11th meeting be accepted and carried. Motion made and seconded to accept the 5 proposed members. Carried. Report of the Secretary. Collected approximately $48, paid to Treasurer $35, with a balance of $13. Motion made and seconded to accept the report of the Secretary. Carried. Meeting of February 1st continued, and the motion was made and seconded. The report of the Reception Committee of an approximate profit of $25 be accepted. The motion was carried. The Building Committee reports progress. Motion made and seconded that the Secretary made order on the Treasurer for the necessary fee for the incorporation of the company. Carried. Motion made and seconded that the report of delinquent members be laid over to the next meeting. Carried. Motion made and seconded that Building Site Committee be enlarged to 4 members. Carried. Appointees, Mr. F. Smith and J. Hand. Assistant Chief's report. 2 chimney fires, and both are subdued with no property damage. Motion made and seconded that the Secretary notify Lauren Sherman of a fine of 25 cents for failure to report a fire when informed as such. Carried. New members accepted are A. Murphy, M. Sorrentino, K. Harmon, W. Hyde, Al Smith. Motion made and seconded to adjourn. Carried. Submitted, J. Betts, Secretary. Meeting of the Long Hill Fire Company, No. 1 Inc., March 8th, 1921. Call to order at 8:25 p.m. Mr. Coombs presiding. Roll call. 2 absent, Hart and Townsend. Motion made and seconded to adopt Article 2, Section 1 and Section 2. Carried. Motion made and seconded to adopt Article 3, Article 4, Article 5, Article 6, Article 7, Article 8, Article 9, Article 10, and Article 11, with promise that any members of the Long Hill Volunteer Fire Company in good standing whose dues have been paid or are paid at the date of organization of this company upon signing a copy of the Articles of Association of this company as provided in said articles. Signing of the Articles of Incorporation. Nominations and elections of officers. Nominations for Chief. Charles Kellogg and W. Coombs nominated for Chief. Long Hill Fire Company No. 1 Inc., votes cast for Chief, 37. Kellogg, 23. Coombs, 8. Scattered votes of 6. Mr. Charles Kellogg elected as Chief. Nominations for Assistant Chief. B. Beach, F. Smith, W. Coombs, and W. Dewey. Votes cast, 38. B. Beach, 6, F. Smith, 16, W. Coombs, 8, W. Dewey, 6. Second ballot, F. Smith with 31 votes, W. Coombs with 5, and 2 blank votes. Mr. Smith was elected Assistant Chief. Nominations for Secretary: Joseph Betts, L.H. Whitney, Albert Smith Jr., Ray Lucas, Otto Walter. Total votes cast, 37. Necessary for choice, 19, of which L.H. Whitney, 25, J. Betts, 9, scattered 3, L.H. Whitney elected. Nominations for Treasurer: B. Beach, E. Sherman. Mr. Beach had 31, Mr. Sherman 3. Both men refused to act. L.H. Whitney was nominated and elected Treasurer. Nomination for Directors: B.S. Beach, Ernest Sherman, George Smith. All 3 were elected. Motion made and carried. We adjourn for recess of 5 minutes. Meeting called after recess by Mr. Charles Kellogg, Chief. Motion made and carried that we accept the property and assets of the Volunteer Fire Company of Long Hill. The following men were nominated and selected on the Entertainment Committee: Frank Smith, Ernest Sherman, George Smith, Arthur Paddock, Ray Lucas, and Walter Coombs. Motion made and carried that we turn down the purchase of Gabler's Ship as a firehouse. Motion made and carried that the Old Building and Site Committee be instructed to see Mr. Morrissey and purchase one of his lots at a price not to exceed $500. Mr. C.A. Baum was nominated for membership. Motion made and carried that John Snyder be put on the Building Committee. Motion made and carried that we adjourn until the first Tuesday in April. Submitted, L.H. Whitney, Secretary.
It was early in the 20th century, and Long Hill was beginning to change. Although the town of Trumbull was over 100 years old, it had always been a rural area. However, Bridgeport was a growing industrial city, and that meant growth for Trumbull. As more people moved into the area, the threat of fire became ever increasingly a problem to the residents of Long Hill. They realized that they could no longer risk losing their homes and possessions in an uncontrollable blaze. And so on December 11th, 1919, 88 residents met in what was then Gabler's Hall in the Hoyt Brothers Witch Hazel Factory. The outcome of the meeting was the organization of the Long Hill Fire Company. Although the company was very crudely organized and lack of equipment, interested citizens began holding dances and used the proceeds to purchase 24 chemical fire extinguishers. These were placed in homes to be used as the first line of defense against fire. It soon became evident that in order to control fire effectively, greater organization was needed. Increased responsibilities also came with the continued growth of the town, and the members of Long Hill Fire Company decided to incorporate. On January 11th, 1921, the men adopted a set of bylaws and decided on a name. At the meeting on February 21st, the incorporation papers were signed by all involved. And on March 8th, 1921, the state of Connecticut seal was affixed, thereby recognizing the Long Hill Fire Company #1 Incorporated as a legal corporation set up with the intent providing fire protection for residents of Long Hill area. The members elected Charles Kellogg as chief of the company and A.J. Hull as the first president. Chief Kellogg, with the aid of 2 assistant chiefs, 1 captain, 2 lieutenants, directed the 75 member of the company at fires and training sessions. The meetings were for a time held at the old Levitt store on Main Street, directly across from what is now Juanita Avenue. As the membership grew, it was necessary to meet in larger quarters, and the old schoolhouse at the intersection of Main Street and Modesi Avenue, the present Lake Avenue, became the next meeting hall. Since telephone service was available to the residents, it was decided that this would be the best method of reporting fires. The necessary arrangements were made to have the calls go directly to the chief's house. He, in turn, set off the siren and called the men to meet him at the scene of the fire. Word quickly spread that in case of fire, the things to do was to call 20 Trumbull. It is interesting to note that since there were no apparatus at the time, the chief's car served as a company fire truck. The chief always had several chemical extinguishers in his car and drove as quickly as possible to the fire. Once there, he and his men used extinguishers and any other tools available to control the flames. The company soon realized it would have to obtain a pumping engine. Before they could, however, they needed a place to put it. Therefore, plans were made to build a firehouse on Meadow Street, which could also be used as a hall for dances and socials, and as a recreation facility for the members of the company. The first annual meeting was held on December 6, 1921. It was noted that during the first year of its existence, the Long Hill Volunteer Fire Company No. 1 had obtained 2 chemical extinguishers with 24 recharges, 4 ladder hooks, 50 feet of rope, 1 fire axe, and a dozen galvanized iron pails. Although this equipment was not considered the best, it was the beginning, and it was supplemented by the chemical extinguishers already in homes throughout the area. A special meeting was held on December 20th to establish the final specifications for the Meadow Street Firehouse. This was done and the contract was put out to bid. The resulting bids were opened on January 17th, 1922, and the contract was awarded to Walter S. Hawley, with a signed contract taking place on February 7th.
Everything seemed to be going along quite well until the members realized there was no road from the firehouse site to Main Street. Therefore, on March 7th, a committee was established to build a suitable road from the site next to the Morrissey property to Main Street. This section of Meadow Street was maintained by the company until March 6, 1928, when the town of Trumbull accepted it as a town road. This was not, however, the full extent of the problems which affected early fire company operations. For example, during March of 1922, a call was received for a chimney fire at about 7:30 a.m. The members who responded did so by running, since none of their cars would start with a temperature at 15 below. At last, the meeting on May 16th brought the news that the Meadow Street Firehouse was complete and the outside painting was in progress. The first meeting held in the new building was on June 6th, and the weekend of June 22 to 24 was set aside for the formal dedication. This was highlighted by a dance and other festivities, and soon after, the Meadow Street Firehouse became a community center of Long Hill. Along with the new firehouse came a mortgage, however. To pay for this and to finance the purchase of the new equipment, it was decided that a carnival be held from July 25th through July 29th. Besides the amusements and booths of chance, a chicken was to be given away each night as a ground prize. The highlight of the carnival was the raffle of a Ford Model T with an electric starter. The festival was a huge success and was to become an annual event. It was enjoyed by the townspeople so much, in fact, that they began to look forward to the next one. Once the carnival matters were settled and a profit realized, the members knew they would be able to pay off the mortgage on the firehouse over a period of several years, and thought of purchasing a fire truck began to circulate among their members. Then, on the night of August 20th, just past midnight, an alarm came in for a house fire in the Chestnut Hill area. By the time the men arrived, the building was almost completely engulfed in flame, and the fire company was unable to control it with just the hand extinguishers. Prompted by this disaster, and in light of the feelings already prevalent among the members, a 5-man committee was appointed to investigate the purchase of a motorized fire truck capable of pumping. On November 13th, the company received word that it had been granted a tax exemption on its property and equipment by the town of Trumbull. Even so, the decision to purchase a fire truck meant added financial responsibility for the men. The idea of bowling alleys next to the firehouse seemed like a good means of providing a more constant income than the carnivals could provide. However, before this could be accomplished, it was necessary to purchase more land and make certain improvements in the existing firehouse. One of the needed improvements was a water system. The fire company was fortunate enough to have this donated by the Community Club of Trumbull. This was the women's organization which made many contributions to the fire company, donated much of its members' time and services to improving and maintaining the Meadow Street Firehouse, and served as an unofficial auxiliary to the firemen.
Finally, in November 1923, a committee was started to raise money for a chemical fire engine. The members investigated the various types of equipment available and arranged for several demonstrations. It was not, however, until March of 1924 that it was decided that the new chemical engine, when purchased, should be mounted on a rail chassis. At a special Warren meeting on March 22nd, Peter Persons Sons Company was given an order for a 2-tank chemical engine to be mounted on the chassis. The name to be lettered on the truck was, of course, the Long Hill Fire Company No. 1 Incorporated. While waiting for the new engine to be delivered, the volunteers purchased 12 tip-top hand chemical extinguishers. 2 of these were to be placed on the new truck, and the rest were to be placed in additional homes in the area. In late June, the long-awaited truck arrived. Unlike today's pumpers, the chemical engine resembled a large soda acid extinguisher on wheels. Its 2 tanks containing a soda water solution. At a fire, acid was released until these tanks and the resulting chemical reaction forced the solution through the rubber hoses under pressure. Although the pressure was not great and the water supply did not last too long, the new chemical engine was a great improvement over the small hand extinguishers and water buckets. The new truck was placed in service on July 1st, 1924, with the stipulation that it would not leave town except on an emergency call. The chemical engine was the newest piece of equipment then currently owned by the company. Since other items were being acquired all the time, it was decided to post a list in the engine room designating the houses which had fire company equipment in them. Further, posters were printed giving the residents instructions on how to summon the fire apparatus. By the time of the annual meeting held on December 2nd, 1924, the fire company owned the following equipment: a 2-tank chemical engine with a ladder, a crowbar, 2 lanterns, a fire axe, and 2 hand chemical extinguishers, 4 ladder hooks, 6 helmets, 25 pails, and 50 feet of rope. 26 chemical extinguishers had also been placed in homes throughout the area. In January of 1925, a mutual aid agreement was discussed with neighboring fire companies. In the event of a bad fire, the closest fire company would send help and others would stand by in case more help was needed. A siren for the firehouse was purchased in January and by early March had been installed. With this, the procedure for notifying the volunteers was changed slightly. The chief still received the calls at his house, but instead of calling men by phone, he now notified only the 2 drivers by telegraph, which had been installed in each of their homes. He would then go directly to the fire with his car and the extinguishers he had in it. The drivers went to the firehouse, cranked the siren for the rest of the volunteers to hear, and then took the truck to the fire. The remainder of the members followed a short time later in their own cars. Thus, not only was the initial response quickened, but more men knew about the call. During the first 6 months of 1926, the members voted to join the Connecticut State Firemen's Association and also authorized the president to submit an application for a Boy Scout troop charter. Another item of business was the carnival. Instead of a car, the fire company raffled off a prize of 15 tons of coal. So successful, in fact, was the carnival that year that by October, the mortgage on the firehouse had been paid entirely. A wood-burning stove was then purchased for the sum of $5 to heat the engine bay. Since the carnivals were increasing in popularity as well as revenue, the suggestion was made that in order to better protect the fire company, a separate organization should be established to be responsible for the carnival and social events. Thus, the Long Hill Social Athletic Club and Fair Associate Incorporated was begun, with its membership coming from the fire company roll.
By the late 1920s, the firehouse had become the community center of Long Hill. Not only used for social events, the town utilized the building as a library and as a polling place. This increase in use, however, called for a continued modernization. Realizing this, the community club paid for the installation of water system, a later added water heater. The fire company used the carnival profits to purchase adjoining lots for future expansion. It was then decided to add a central heating system to replace the wood-burning stoves. The winter of 1929 was a difficult one for the firemen of the Long Hill Fire Department. In January, Chief Kellogg and several firemen narrowly escaped injury when the floor of a house in which they were fighting a fire collapsed beneath them. Almost a month later, the chief again avoided injury when his car was demolished on an icy curve on Broadway Road, near the Witch Hazel factory, while responding to an alarm. It was becoming apparent that the task of firefighting was growing rapidly in the town. The men of the company realized that they would no longer be able to shoulder the burden of protecting the community alone. A committee was soon formed to investigate the creation of a legal fire district which would conform to state statutes. On November 22, 1929, the committee and residents and taxpayers of the Long Hill area met and voted to establish the Long Hill Fire District. David Coran, J.M. Snyder, and Dr. C.E. Atkins were elected as the first fire commissioners. B.S. Beach was named tax collector, Charles A. Bradley, treasurer, and L.W. Sherman, secretary. After this, the fire company and the fire district worked hand in hand, with the company supplying the manpower and the station, and the district purchasing equipment to be used by for the firemen of the company. An item of major importance was the district meeting in April 1930, at which it was voted to raise revenue through a fire tax to provide for hydrant service to be installed. The tax was not to exceed 2 mills. On October 30th, 1930, the hydrant service was installed with hydrant number 1 located on Main Street on Oster Place. A resolution was adopted at the district meeting of April 14th, 1931, stating, in view of amiable relations and the interlocking relations between the members of the Long Hill Volunteer Fire Company Number 1 and the Long Hill Fire District, be it resolved that the officers of the Long Hill Fire District are hereby directed to cooperate in every particular with the Long Hill Volunteer Fire Company Number 1 in all efforts for the promotion of better fire protection, and particularly in arranging for the housing, maintenance, and use of any fire apparatus which may be acquired by the Long Hill Fire District. In further defining the establishment of the fire district, a motion was carried on June 1st that the purpose of the Long Hill Fire District shall be the protection of property from damage and destruction by fire. By this time, the chemical engine owned by the volunteers was 7 years old, and the district commissioners and residents authorized the purchase of a pumper of a Peter Person Sons Company. Also approved for the purchase of an electric siren for the firehouse and new hose for the pumper. To help the fire company financially, an arrangement was made whereby the district paid for the rent for the use of the firehouse. A major problem facing the company was what to do with a chemical truck. Since there was only one bay at the Meadow Road station, a suitable housing had to be found for the older vehicle. The district once again stepped in and rented a garage from George Hasselblad, I don't like the name right, sorry, then paid for the enlargement and heating of the building.
Another joint effort between the company and the district came in 1933. At the time, there was no way for the men living and working in the lower end of the district to hear the siren on Meadow Road Firehouse. Therefore, it was decided to place another siren on a telephone pole at Beach's Corner, which is the intersection of Main Street and Chestnut Hill Road. Friendly games of competition soon began to spring up. One of the highlights of the 1934 carnival was a tug-of-war between the Long Hill and Stepney volunteers. This continued as an annual event until the war years. Pinochle tournaments were started later in the spring of 1935. The weekly games between the men soon spread to the neighboring fire companies, and Meadow Road Firehouse became the meeting place for the firemen of the surrounding towns. About the same time, weekly drills began on Tuesday nights, and this practice is still in effect today. By the late 1930s, the number of calls in the lower Long Hill area had begun to increase. The need for a new firehouse and another pumper in this section of town became apparent as more people moved into town. A new Darley pumper mounted on a Ford chassis went into service in May of 1937. The new pumper, designated Engine 202, was placed in Hasselblad's garage at the lower end of the district, while Peter Persh, Engine 203, remained stationed at the Meadow Road Firehouse. The old chemical truck was given to Chief Kellogg to use as Wood's firefighting truck. Its chemical tanks were no longer used, but the truck carried brooms, shovels, and hand-operated water extinguishers. It was kept in the garage until March 1938, when it was retired from service. In 1940, it was sold to Ralph Randall, who used it as a vegetable truck. As the operating expenses of the company grew, it became evident that revenue from the annual carnival was not enough to meet the cost for an entire year. Bingo parties were begun to supplement the carnival income, and this idea proved so popular that bingo became the main source of revenue for the next 3 years. In 1939, Chief Kellogg announced that he would not run for re-election as chief of the company. At the annual meeting in December, Raymond Lucas was elected to the post, and the company voted unanimously to make Charles Kellogg a lifetime member. Both the company and the district went on record as thanking him for his many years of devoted service to the people of Long Hill. During the summer of 1940, the company decided it would have to find some additional means to supplement its income. The building of the bowling alley next to the Meadow Road station was finally begun. Although this idea had been discussed in the 1920s, nothing had ever been done to actually build the addition. Eventually, the new firehouse was built on the corner of Main Street and Wilmot Avenue. It was a 2-bay station, which is still in use today, although it has just been enlarged to house the new aerial ladder truck. The onset of the war had a devastating effect upon the entire community. Most of the men were in the armed services, and everyone who stayed behind was busy manning the defense factories. No one had time to carnival or bingo games, and the fire company began to suffer financially. Its creditors were notified that they would be paid just as soon as funds were available. This was the first time that the company had been unable to meet its expenses.
To alleviate its own financial stress, the Long Hill Fire District accepted the section of town north of Stonehouse Road under its jurisdiction. This increased the amount of taxes paid to the districts, but did nothing to help the company financially. In fact, it imposed an increased burden on the few men who were left in town. Blackout curtains on the firehouse were purchased, and the fire company was able to hold a very limited indoor carnival. The small sum which raised, it went towards the war damage insurance policy for the Meadow Road station. It became necessary to close the bowling alley because of the shortage of fuel oil. But this was not the end of the problems. The manpower shortage became so severe that the age requirement for a firefighter had been lowered to 17 years of age. Even then, there were seldom enough men attending the meetings to form a quorum, and many meetings had to be canceled. By 1944, even the indoor carnivals had to be canceled because of the shortage of men. Towards the end of 1944, however, it became apparent that victory would be assured and the moral of the community began to lighten. The volunteers decided to hold a clam bake for themselves as well as their families. And friends of all the firemen who had been away, this became an annual event and is continued today. It was 1945, however, when things really began to look up. The rolls of the fire company swelled up to the number of 105 members, and the property value in the district went up to over $4 million. Finally, a much-needed carnival and car raffle took place. In 1946, a minstrel show had also held that year, and the company's debts were soon paid off. It was soon voted to sponsor Cub Scout Pack in addition to the present Boy Scout troop, and to hold a dance in 1947. This dance was the first big social event in many years, and thanks to a donation of 18 cents by one of the members, showed no profits or loss. It appeared that the fire company, as well as the town, was back on its feet at last. The fire district was in a position to purchase another truck and ordered a city quad from the Mack Fire Apparatus Company. This truck serves as a pumper and a ladder truck and carried such special equipment as a portable electric generator and a resuscitator. Although only carrying ground ladders, this vehicle served as the department's ladder truck until 1971, when it was replaced by a more modern aerial ladder truck. The annual meeting in 1949 saw a next major change in the company's administration. Chief Lucas announced his retirement, and he was thanked for his 11 years of service as chief to the fire company and the town. Frederick Barber was chosen to succeed him at that meeting. Chief Barber's new office brought him many new problems, most of which were associated with the continued expansion of town. One major problem was communications. There were several members who lived in new homes in the outlying sections of the districts. The old sirens could not be heard by many of these men, and something had to be done to help them hear the alarms. Therefore, in conjunction with the fire district, the men of the company decided to install an air horn system. The air horns would send out numbered codes designating the location of the fire, and the number of times the code was sounded indicated the type of fire. All members were issued code books with numbered codes of streets, and the system was put into operation in the early of the fall of 1948. It was no longer necessary for the men to go to the firehouse to find its location of the fire, and thus the response had quickened.
Excuse me. Another problem which required action by the fire company was that increased traffic in town. The apparatus from the Meadow Road station was having difficulty getting onto Main Street when responding to alarms. An application was submitted to the State Highway Commission to have a traffic light installed at the intersection of Meadow Road and Route 25. This light was controlled from inside the station and momentarily stopped traffic in all directions while giving responding apparatus a green light to proceed onto Main Street. This, however, was not the only traffic problem, since the installation of the air horn system, more men were driving directly to the firehouse in their own cars. As a result, a parking problem developed at the scene. Also, many townspeople began to chase the fire trucks. A serious traffic problem developed, and unless a town police officer was available, the apparatus was delayed in reaching the fire scene. Something had to be done about this congestion problem, and the men of the fire company decided to start a fire police unit. These men would be responsible for controlling the direction of traffic at fires, and also for keeping unauthorized person from entering the buildings in which there had been a fire. A Long Hill Fire Police were officially sworn in and presented with their badges in September 6, 1950 by the Trumbull Police Chief Raymond Beckwith. Increasing number of alarms each year was also placing a great strain on the apparatus. In early 1951, it was decided that the district purchase a new pumper, and an order was placed with Mack Fire Apparatus Company. The new engine, designated 201, was placed in the Meadow Road Firehouse, and the older Peter Persch engine, now designated 203, was placed in the firehouse next to the Knights of Columbus Hall on Hickory Street in the Chestnut Hill area. The firehouse came under the jurisdiction of the Long Hill Fire District when the Chestnut Hill Fire Department agreed to become part of Long Hill Fire Department in 1951. With the addition of the new truck and acquiring of another fire station, it soon became apparent that more firemen would be needed to provide adequate fire protection. It was brought to the attention of the members that several young men were interested in joining, but could not because of the company's 18-year-old age requirements. Finally, the members voted to open the company roll to the 16, 18-year-old group and accepted applications for the new junior membership category at April 1st, 1952. The first applications were accepted into the company on May 6th, thus giving young men a chance to observe and learn the firefighting job at 16. The method of fire reporting in the early 1950s was through the Trumbull Police Department. Upon receiving a call, the police would activate the air horn system. The firemen would then either proceed directly to the street, as indicated by the code, or to the firehouse where further information could be received by telephone. After leaving for the fire in the trucks, however, the men had no way of communicating with the other apparatus, or the firehouse. Thus, it often occurred that the truck from one station would put the fire out and return to the station while the trucks from the other stations were still en route. In order to correct this problem, the Fire Commission in October of 1954 decided to have two-way radios installed in all of the trucks and a base station set up in the lower Main Street Firehouse. About the same time, the other two fire departments in town decided to install radios, and it was decided that all the fire apparatus should be given numbers. For the sake of simplicity on the air, all Long Hill trucks were numbered from 201 and up, all Trumbull Center trucks were numbered from 101 and up, and all Nichols trucks were numbered from 301 and up.
The company members realized that the Meadow Road station would have to be modernized if it was to continue being used. Only a few years earlier, steel rods had to be installed to pull the original sidewalls together. Now the bowling alleys needed attention. In order to modernize the operation of the alleys, automatic pin setting equipment had to be installed. In order to service this new machinery, however, it was necessary to raise the entire roof of the building, which housed the alleys. Due to the great expense involved, this matter was discussed at several meetings without reaching a decision. Finally, at a specially warned meeting in February of 1956, it was decided to have the work performed. The alleys remained in operation until 1969. Toward the end of 1956, the firemen bestowed the rank of honorary chief upon ex-chief Ray Lucas and ex-assistant chief Peter Slice as a tribute for their years of dedicated service to the fire company. Because Trumbull had three separate fire companies, there was often a mistake made when placing a fire call. Since there was no central fire dispatcher for all the three companies, the confusion was doubled. At a meeting in early 1957, the town's fire chiefs and commissioners established a mutual aid plan whereby a company receiving a wrong call would attempt to have the correct department respond and would stand by in case more help was needed. If the correct department for some reason could not respond, the other departments would. It was noted that the wives of the firemen were giving much of their time and effort to help the company, and they had expressed an interest in forming an auxiliary. With the approval of the membership present at the April meeting, the Ladies Auxiliary of the Long Hill Fire Company was officially established, and the first meeting was held in May 1957. In order to further increase their use of the Meadow Road station, the firemen voted to have the front porch enclosed and made into a lounge and to have its heater installed in the bowling alleys. Also, the exterior of the main building was shingled and 100 additional chairs were purchased. Soon after these improvements were made, the members of the company approached the fire commissioners concerning the building of a new fire station in the Chestnut Hill area of the district. With their approval, the new firehouse was built on Madison Avenue, just north of the Mare Parkway. It was noted that since several new areas had been added to the fire district, the number of fire commissioners would increase from 3 to 5. With the two of the district's pumpers now more than 20 years old, the next problem to face the company and the commissioners was the eventual replacement of these trucks. Two new 750-gallon per minute pumpers were ordered from the Maxim Motor Company to augment the present equipment. These two sister trucks, designated engines 205 and 206, each carried 500 gallons of water and are still in active service today. As the number of alarms increased, the firemen were called upon again and again to demonstrate their proficiency. In fact, the volunteers of Long Hill twice won nationwide acclaim when, in 1958 and 1960, they received the first place New York Daily News Vamps Award. The trophy was presented to the fire company in the metropolitan New York area that demonstrated the highest degree of professionalism while combating a major fire. Later in 1962, the company received a third place award also. In 1959, June, the company members completed a first aid course offered by the American Red Cross. Soon after, the communication system was again updated when the Long Hill Company joined the surrounding town in creating a county-wide fire radio network. This enabled all departments in Fairfield County to operate in one frequency in time and of a major disaster, and was brought about through the efforts of the Fairfield County Fire Chief's Emergency Plan.
At the annual meeting in December, Chief Barber retired and Donald Randall was elected to success him. Little did the new chief elected know the first year was an increase in fire calls from 98 to 203. Since the two trucks recently purchased performed so well, the district decided to sell the old Peter Persch engine and replace it with another Maxim pumper slightly larger than the two previously ones. The summer of 1960 saw the performance of the newly formed fire company, Drum Corp, the parades, and foundation of the Benevolent Fund to provide assistance to firemen's family in case of injury and death. The members began deciding the possibility of purchase a rescue truck, which would be the first of its kind in town. A committee of 5 was appointed to look into the matter, and the membership was voted to put aside the years of carnival profit towards the eventual purchase of the vehicle. The new pumper, Engine 203, arrived in September 1961 and is stationed in Meadow Road Firehouse. Because of its larger size, the new truck can barely fit into the old bay. Realizing the old fire truck was apparently outdated, the Fire Commission purchased land at the corner of Main Street and Clemens Avenue as a site for the proposed firehouse. The first year, the Slackers emergency number was set on all district taxpayers. The stickers, which were placed in the telephone, kept the number of the police and the fire department rapidly available in case of emergency. Before selling the now retired Peter Persch engine to the United Fire Company in Boxford, the fire company asked to receive permission from the district to remove the bell. This was best used as a permanent record at all charter members by having their names engraved on it at all. All members with 25 years or more of service would also have their names on the plaque attached to the base of the bell. This continued growth in Trumbull was now creating many new problems with the volunteer fire department. Until recently, the town was nearly all residential, with some small businesses. In the early 1960s, however, Long Hill was faced with a new consolidate homes for the early and multi-million-dollar shopping park. The first steps of preparing the firemen to cope with this complex additions was comprehensive training program. It consists of 30-week firefighting school conducted by the state of Connecticut, divided into 10-week sessions. This problem covered hydraulics, ladders, work, general fire department techniques. The volunteers devoted one night a week in the course and added the weekly drills. Schooling began in March 1963. Shortly therefore, St. Joe's Manor began operation. In the summer months was spent making pre-fire plans tours of the building. With the new hospital located in the upper section of the district, the fire commissioners soon acted for the new fire station as planned. On September 12, 1963, the contract of the new fire station was issued and the construction started within the next few weeks. In early 1964, the Trumbull Shopping Park was open for business and the volunteers began taking tours of the complex also. The firefighting course was just about completed by February when the committee working on the rescue specifications reported that he had completed the work. The next step was to get the funds to purchase the necessary apparatus was made and warned the meeting in May. The contract was awarded to Ginsberg Company within a few weeks.
By June, the new firehouse was completed and the dedication was held on the 14th. The opening of the new building necessitated the relocation of the air horn system from Meadow Road Station and the base radio equipment from Station 2. The increase in the number of alarms was placed a burden on the Trumbull police dispatchers because of each alarm. It was necessary to look up the correct street code, set up the code in the alarm in the horn system, and then answer the phones from the firehouses. This was in addition to answering the police lines. In an effort to correct the situation, the 5 commissioners investigated and it purchased a tone-activated radio receiver system from the Plectron Corporation. These radios were placed in the firemen's homes and activated by dispatchers, who would then give the location, type of fire over the radio. The new air horn system was preset on code 322, and all dispatch had to do was push the start button and activate the home receivers. The rescue truck was delivered in January 1965, and the company members found it necessary to revise a section of the bylaws to include a captain of the emergency truck in the list of officers. A lieutenant was also added later, at a later date. The truck provided to be a great help in fighting building fires and also aided in accident victims. It soon became evident that although the number of houses in town was increasing, so was the number of fires in the remaining woodlands. A fire in a heavily wooded area meant a good deal of work for the firemen, especially since larger pumpers could not get in close enough to be effective. The district, as a result, purchased a brush fire truck. The small truck, equipped with four-wheel drive, could go into the woods and through almost any terrain to attack a fire. It also carried men and equipment in and out of the woods, thus eliminating much of the back-breaking work usually encountered. The dry summer of 1965 provided to the fire commissioners that the purchase of 207 was a wise decision. Additional training courses were scheduled at the Willimantic State Training Facility. Included in this program was actual on-the-job training and also rescue training. Due to increase in traffic on the radio, and the three fire departments decided to use code signal radio signals. These would minimize congestion and still get the message through. The power blackout of October 9th, 1965 caught the Long Hill Volunteers off guard, as it did just about all of Northeast. There were no provisions for emergency power, and it was necessary to operate the base radio from power supplied by the emergency truck's generator. At the annual meeting in 1965, Chief Donald Randall announced his retirement and was presented with a past chief badge. George Flick was elected to succeed him. To ensure that power failures would never happen again, hamper the fire department's operations, the fire commissioners voted to have the emergency generators installed in all three firehouses in February of 1966. At the same time, a town-wide central fire dispatching system was also being considered. This would allow all emergency calls to be reported by calling one number. These calls would be received at the police station, and fire calls would be dispatched to the proper department by the police department. This also enabled the mutual aid plan to work more efficiently. The 1937 Darley pumper, called 202, was in poor operating condition at this time. Even though it was only being used for brush fires, its days of reliability had long passed, and the fire commissioners elected to replace it. In proposing plans for a new pumper, the volunteers pointed out that quite a few tanker trucks carrying flammable fluids were now currently traveling Main Street, and wished the development of a new Route 25 in the near future. Many more such trucks would be passing through town. They were able to convince the commissioners that a foam system should be included in the new pumper.
Finally, on April 18, 1968, the new pumper purchased from the Maxim Motor Company was delivered. The truck, designated Foam Unit 202, had a 1,000 gallon per minute pump, and as the name implies, a built-in foam dispersal system. It resembles an airport crash truck and is capable of pumping while in motion. Later in 1968, the fire company undertook a major revision of its corporate bylaws in an effort to update its governing rules. The task of firefighting in Trumbull was becoming so complex that the volunteers could no longer be referred to as amateurs. This was verified by the State Board of Fire Underwriters, who, after evaluating the men and equipment of the three departments, allowed the residents a decrease in the fire insurance ratings. This put Trumbull on the same scale as a town that employed full-time firemen. In an effort to improve the image of the fire company at certain functions, the membership voted in January of 1969 to purchase full-dress uniforms for its 50 active members. This also served to improve the morale of the men, and that they knew that was new now that they looked as professional as the job they were doing. One of the training highlights of this year's was Long Hill's participation in a countywide civil defense exercise staged at 90 Acres Park in Bridgeport. This drill simulated an airline accident which over 100 victims consisting of high school and college students who had volunteered their service. The injuries were well simulated, and the main point of the drill was to see if adequate training and facilities were available to handle a disaster of such major proportions. The operations was deemed a success by the civil defense leaders. About the same time, there was a great deal of discussion concerning the purchase of an aerial truck. This was prompted by the need of calling for just such a truck from the city of Bridgeport at several major fires in the past few years. The fire commissioner voted to purchase a 100-foot aerial ladder truck from the Pierre Thibault Company of Canada. It was noted that it would take over a year to have this truck built and delivered. The following year saw an emphasis placed on health and safety. In February of 1970, the volunteers enrolled in a first aid course which lasted 10 weeks, also in cooperation with a recent state law stating that all firefighters must have a heart and lung examination to be covered by workman's compensation in the event of a heart attack. The volunteers of Long Hill were given the necessary examination by the company's physician. The fees were paid by the fire district. Plans were also in the making for an additional and minor modernization of Station 2. This was in part to house the expected aerial ladder truck. The next year, 1971, was to be a big year for the fire company and the department. Plans were launched for a 50th anniversary celebration that would include the publication of the history of the fire company, a social hour, and a dinner dance. Also scheduled was the company's participation in the Barnum Festival, known as Trumbull Day, celebration, and the festival parade. The apparatus and the parades attended were decorated in gold and bore signs announcing the company's 50th birthday. The district saw the completion of the addition at Station 2 in May and the delivery of the aerial ladder truck designated Aerial 204 in July. The volunteers soon began a training program with the ladder truck to ensure its correct usage. The membership also voted to permanently close the bowling alleys, which had not been used since 1969. This was due to the fact that profit was no longer being realized. The alleys themselves were to be disassembled and the building used for other purposes. This year has also been one of planning for Long Hill. As the task of firefighting grows ever more complex, the volunteers realize that they must continually update their training. They continue to give freely of their time and energy in the same tradition that the founders of the company did. No one knows exactly what future years will bring for the fire company for Trumbull, but one thing is certain, the tradition of 50 years of bravery, dedication, and service will be carried on as long as there is a need by the volunteer firemen of the Long Hill Fire Company No. 1 Incorporated.
Died in the line of duty, Assistant Chief Chester J. Maine, December 15th, 1957. I hope you enjoyed our program this evening. We look forward to more events as we move into the spring and summer of 2021. Please watch your email for announcements of future events. It is our hope that we can celebrate the second 50 years in person as the months move along. I'd like to thank you and your families for joining us this evening. Stay well and stay safe.